Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm going to start off with my normal marketing pitch, which is here's 3 courses that I have posted right now that are live on Udemy. Please take a look and check them out. And for folks who actually do stop by my YouTube channel and listen, if you ping me, hit me up on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, any one of them, DM me, send me a message. I'll send you a coupon code to get a discount on any of these courses that are listed and are available right now. I'm still working on some other courses coming, hopefully coming up, probably not next month, because I'm in the middle of another program that I'm kicking off. But if you have ideas on projects, programs, please hit me up and let me know, and I can, take your input. Want to generate content that people really want to watch, because I think that's the most important thing about what I'm trying to do. Okay. Okay. The other work we're doing is a Futures Written in Code program, which is a combination of a business boot camp, but a heavier focus on the development. The concept that we have here is to work with developers who know React.js or Vue, and with their co-founder, or if it's their idea on their own, to spend the first 2 weeks drilling down and working through what their idea and their concept is, understanding the market, understanding requirements, and then we'll spend the last 6 weeks actually working with you to build out your solution. Our objective is not to build your whole solution. Our objective is to, during those 6 weeks, through a combination of office hours and online programming, work with you and the cohort together to help you understand issues and challenges that you have building your app. We will provide templates to get your app started. The goal is that we will persist any content you want to persist in Firebase. We will show you how to do Firebase login, Firebase create account, how to store your objects, and basically how to structure your application. But the primary focus is on building an MVP, which is to demonstrate some sort of value to your customers, so we can ensure you have product market fit. So that's what this project is. Like I said, first 2 weeks will be focused on understanding what the requirements are. The last 6 weeks will be focused on actually building your solution. You'll have support from me. You'll have support from an entrepreneurship expert to help you with your requirements. And we're just gonna be your extra development resource to help you get your application built. Of course, there is a price for this resource. There is a price for this project. There is a price for this program. We have an early bird price that we are charging $450 for this, which actually is a total value of somewhere over $1,000, because if you factor in the hours that we're doing course time, the hours that we're doing office hours, it's a lot of value that we're giving you for actually not giving you. It's a lot of value that you're getting out of this program. As I said, the technology stack will be Ionic Framework. That's what we work with. We're going to be storing all our content in Firebase. If hosting is needed, we're going to host it on Firebase. There's an application form that you can fill out, and feel free to shoot me emails if you have any questions on this program also. So once again, this is our Futures Written in Code MVP development program. It is for individuals who have an idea for a concept or a product, have experience with React.js or Vue, and want to kind of build that solution using Ionic Framework and Firebase. So that's what this program is. Okay, once again, please make sure you like and subscribe. And now let's kind of get to what the focus of this YouTube video is. Okay, welcome back. In this video, we are going to take the application that we built in the earlier react-fire solution. And as you can see in the bottom, we're showing the Redux. So we're going to actually implement react-redux. For those of you who follow me, you very rarely see me use react-redux because I'm not really a big fan of it. I think there's a fair bit of boilerplate there, and I just never could wrap my head around it and get the right mental model for it to make sense for me. But I'm always hunting around and looking for interesting tools that can add value, and I stumbled across this Redux Toolkit. It is a different approach to implementing Redux, but it still implements Redux. And as you can see from the information that you're getting here inside of the DevTools, you kind of get the same debugging, rewinding, action state, all the good stuff that you get from Redux, both in my humble opinion, a lot less boilerplate, and something that's a lot easier for me to wrap my head around. So what I'm going to do here, because I've already implemented a solution, is I'm going to walk you through how I integrated this Redux Toolkit into the react-fire application that I did. I'm only going to focus on implementing authentication, account creation, and checking to see if there's an existing user when the application restarts. That's all going to be managed through the state machine that is being implemented using Redux and Redux Toolkit. I took what I believed was a common pattern that people will try to implement, and I'm going to walk you through how I did it. And as I said, I will upload all the source code so you can kind of take a look at source code. Please leave comments below, and hopefully this is something that you enjoy. Okay, so now we're back. I'm just going to kind of walk you through the application, and hopefully you can take a look at what's kind of going on here in the, let me get back to this. Hopefully you can follow along and see the state changes that are happening. I'm going to zoom this in a little bit, so hopefully things are clear. So first, let's start off with an account that I have already created. So you see the first thing was that we dispatched an initialization action to determine if we had a user or not. And if we look at the state here, you can see that we have no user and we have initialized. Now I'm going to attempt to log in. And you can see that we dispatched a login action. And if we take a look at the action here, let's go to login. We can see that I attempted to log in. I have my payload of the user credentials that got passed in. And then after login was successful, then we dispatched a set user data. And what that did was it got the user information and applied it to my user object. So if you look at the state, now the state has been updated. We have all the user information. The set user state also queries the Firebase database and looks in our user table and pulls specific user information that's not part of the Firebase user. And that's just these dummy fields that I have down here in the bottom, this kind of test pin EE. It's just something to show that I'm querying the database after login. And then if I attempt to log this user out, you can see that I dispatched the logout action, and then after the logout action was dispatched, my user data is null, and you can see the application transitioned back into the unauthorized state, and so we're back on the login page. Let's try to create a account. So let's just use a dummy email. So let's say create account 10, and we're going to call it password 10, and we got our account created. And so as you can see, we dispatched a create user event. We passed in the information we dispatched a create user event. Then we set the user data, basically querying the database. It should not have found, let's see. And right now inside of the user object, we're just sticking the ID. So it added the ID to it. And the important thing is that you see it's dispatching the appropriate action. So if we look at the action here and we see the set user data, you see when you dispatch the action, it applied specific user data to set the user data. On create user, we for the action, we got some information here also. What we'll do next is we'll kind of walk through the code so you can see how all these actions get triggered. And you can see the state changes that were happening, kind of like before create user was dispatched, there was nothing in user data. Afterward, you can see that the user information was there. And then before, let's see, the diff, yeah. This is the additional user data that was kind of added. That's the difference between what was there before and what was added. That's what you get with the inspector. Inspector is a cool tool. It can allow you to see what's kind of going on. You can step back through it and see what changes were made. Highly recommend that you utilize this Redux tool when you're working with Redux. Okay, so let's zoom this back down a little bit. Reset. And let's zoom this back down. And let's kind of focus a little bit more on the application. Let's log this guy out and get back to the login screen. Okay, so now we're in app.js. So first of all, to get this done, you basically follow the installation instructions. So if you go back to the getting started, you need to install the Redux Toolkit. So you need to do an npm install Redux Toolkit. Like I said, this is based on the react-fire example that I did previously. And so the first thing that you need to do is you need to go in and you need to make sure you set up the provider. So you import the provider from React-Redux. You configure the store a lot differently than you do in normal Redux. So you import this Redux Toolkit configure store. We'll talk about the reducer that we've imported here later, but that's what you're doing here, and you have the namespaces. So you just say reducer, and you don't have to go through the whole combine reducer. You just say reducer, and you can have different namespaces for multiple reducers. Ours is just called user auth, and we're using the user auth reducer. But now we create the store. We pass the store in as a parameter to the provider, so everyone gets access to the store throughout the application. So that's basically how you get things set up. Let's hop into the reducer, or this user auth slice. I'm just following their terminology. They call them slices. I'm going to use the word slice. You can dig in deeper if you want to understand why. Usually I just accept this is what they call it, so that's what I'm using. So the approach that I've used here is you have this create slice function, or kind of, it's a create, I guess it's a create slice function. Yeah, that's a constructor, and there's different properties that you need to add to this object. And you start off at the top with kind of the name that you want to call this slice, and then you set kind of what you want your initial state to look like. So clearly our initial state is all nulled out. And then I like the way how, like, I simply find this clearer to implement reducers this way than the kind of switch statement approach that is used normally. Like I said, it's just the way my mind works. And what you get passed into each one of these is the state, and then you get passed in a payload. I mean, actually, sorry, you get passed in the state and the action. All that I care about here is just a payload, so I'm using the destructuring to just get access to the payload. So that's kind of what's going on here. And the way that I like to look at it is reducers are where you actually modify the state. And so what you'll see here is there's really not a lot of code going on inside of here. It's just updating state. And so that's how I keep this simple. And what will happen is that changes that get passed in to the reducer come in through the payload, we update the state, and then we just keep it moving. So really where all the action happens is for what we're implementing, a lot of it is happening down here in thunks. And so what a thunk is allowing me to do is allowing me to perform asynchronous logic. And then based on changes when the asynchronous logic is complete, then we'll dispatch a specific action. So we have our actions here, we can get our slice actions. So then we dispatch a specific action, which then gets passed to the reducer, and then we're passing in the results of the specific kind of asynchronous action that we perform down here. As you can see here, let's see if we can find an example. Let's use the login, right? So let's start with login. If we go back to our login page, and this all code is from the previous video, so you might want to check that out. We're doing our handle submit with our username and password, and we come up here to handle submit. We get the values that we need. We're not doing a create event. And so here we dispatch our login, and we're passing in the parameters that we need to pass in. So now we come back to our user auth slice, and we are dispatching this login. So here's a login function. Here's the parameters that get passed in. We call the async function, because remember in the thunks we call our async function async functions. After I call the login, I have a user, and so what I'm doing here is I'm telling Firebase auth, get me the current user. The way that I've implemented this, you need to pass a serializable object into dispatch, and so doing a toJSON on the current user will give me that deserializable object. You can check the documentation to see a little bit more about what I'm talking about, but that's why you're seeing me do a toJSON on this object before I pass it in. It needs to just be straight JSON, no other functions or anything else inside of it. So that's what this does. So now I'm dispatching this login action, and then when I dispatch this, we come up here and we see what login says. We take our payload. Inside of our payload is our user. We set our user data, which is in our state, and then login comes back. And then inside of Thunk, we're doing multiple things. And so now I'm dispatching this get user action. This is where we query our user collection to get any additional information about the user. And we take that additional information and we update the state with it. So if we look at our get user, where did our get user go? And as you can see, our get user is another asynchronous function. So we come down here and we execute our get user. We get the current user ID. Then we make our Firebase query on our collection. If a user exists, we get our user data object here. Then we dispatch the action called set user data. We pass in the user data. Let's go back up to my action. For set user data, we get our payload. Our payload is user data. And all we're doing is we're saying whatever already existed in the user data state, let's take that. And then let's take any new data that we got from our payload and just apply it all to update the user data. Once again, modifications of the state is happening here inside of the reducers. Most of the fun and exciting things are happening down here inside of Thunks. That's basically how you do the login and how I'm kind of managing it. So it's a combination of the login and then the get user state, get user information. This last line, what I'm doing here is I'm returning from this call asynchronously the user data. You shouldn't have to do this because actually you can see we have this selector that I've written down here on the bottom. Basically all selectors do is they're a convenient way to pull specific pieces of state out of the state object. And so all we're doing here is when you call select user, it will just go into state, go into the namespace area called user auth and return the user data for you specifically. I look at it as just a helper function. Inside of your code, you can use a hook to get the state and say state.userauth.user data to get it. This is a, as I said previously, this is a helper function. There's one other interesting thing that I do in here, which I want to kind of talk through, because I've seen other people kind of fumble over this inside of their not their React application, their Firebase applications. What I do when I start up the application here is I use this hook to get the dispatch, and then when my application starts up, I make an asynchronous call and I dispatch this set auth listener action. And so basically what's happening here is, for those who've worked with Firebase before, you know one of the things that you want to do in Firebase is you want to listen for when the authentication state changes. And so I'm in the wrong place. I need to be back here inside my auth. And so when I dispatch that action, where did it go? To set auth listener action, what I'm doing here is calling everybody's favorite function, which is on auth state change. And so what we are doing here is when we come in, if I have a user and I'm not if I have a user and I'm not initialized, then that means that Firebase detected here on this auth state change that it has a user object. Since we haven't been initialized, this is the very first time that it's running. That's the whole point. And since it's the very first time that it's running, we're going to dispatch this login action because we want to update the state. And so the way we update it is we're saying, all right, we have a user, let's pass the user object to login. Our login reducer gets called. I keep saying action. Our login reducer gets called, and then what it does is it actually will go and update the user state with the information from the login. Because remember, this is when it recognizes the auth state has changed. And then what it'll also do is it will get the user. Now, what you also realize is that since I can be in the application and the auth state changes again when I do another login, we don't want to run this code again because when I click the login button, I'll run the code here. I'll dispatch my login here. I'll dispatch my get user, right? But the catch is that this listener will still get called. That is why we're checking here to see if we've been initialized or not. If we've already been initialized, meaning it's been called the first time, right? Then we basically don't do anything. We've just realized that the state changes happen, and we just keep it moving because we know that we're managing it ourselves directly. Now, there's ways that I could go around this. Like I I could probably remove this code here and figure out how to put the appropriate logic up here inside of my auth state change. I could remove this dispatch. Well, no, because the state gets updated properly. Yeah, I could remove this here, but I mean, for me, I like things to be intuitive when people read them. I probably could, name these flags a little bit differently, but the basic idea here is that if you're not initialized, then the auth listener will handle the login and getting the user data. If you're specifically clicking the login button, then we're going to handle it here. And so that's kind of the magic that you see going on and what's happening with auth state listener. That's why if I go back to my application here and I log in again, and so now my user's logged in and you can see everything's working fine down here. But now if I do an empty cache and a hard reload, you can see that login happened up here inside of this initialization process and the set user happened. I didn't have to click the login button. And so that's kind of why up here at the top, I'm dispatching this set auth listener. We discussed the login, where we're dispatching it. We can call the get state here to kind of get the information directly. I don't think I'm actually, I'm using the selector inside of this home page. Let's go back to my home page. So here I have this select user selector. So when it starts up, I say use selector, I pass it the selector that I want to use, and then it's returning my user object here for me. So I have access to my user object. Like I said, I didn't want to go too deep here. I just wanted to keep it simple, show you a specific use case that I implemented, but give you access to all the source code to dig deeper if you wanted to. And so that's what I've done. Hopefully you'll find this valuable for my Ionic followers. This was really just kind of exposing a tool to you that might make your life easier when building an app. You can go in afterwards and add all your cool Ionic UI and everything you want, but I mean, understanding what tools are available for you to manage state, I think is critical in developing your application. So hopefully you found some value in this video, and please make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks. Bye.